Welcome to the oil fields of Alaska and Canada, to the volcanic shores of Hawaii, the bright lights of New York City, and everywhere in between. I welcome all of you joining us for another Flycast Partners presentation. Folks, we have a packed house, full to capacity audience today. So for those of you that are still joining us, you have but seconds to finish. And I want to welcome you to our ITIL IV presentation presented by Flycast Partners' very own Chuck Spencer. Now, Chuck is our lead enterprise service management practitioner and has a very accomplished background that includes Lean Six Sigma, Black Belt, ITIL V3 expert and multiple certifications, including ISO 20000 Manager and Consultant, COBIT 5, PMP, Agile Scrum Master, and Change Management Practitioner. Chuck has well over 25 years in improving and implementing service management processes to drive quality, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. He is an innovative and results-oriented senior technology leader with progressive experience in all phases of service management, project and process management, enterprise technical support, organizational leadership, and strategic development. I have some more accolades to add to Chuck's accomplished past. He has recently become an ITIL IV instructor. He is an ITIL IV instructor and ITIL IV certified. So we're very happy to have him today. Chuck, before we get started, let me introduce our organization, Flycast Partners. We are here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. We're founded and staffed by personnel who have many years of experience in the IT space. We took the best ideas from these collective experiences and added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer best-in-class implementation services and training and IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, and enterprise service management, as well as workload automation spaces using nothing but ITIL best practices. Our professional services can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. We offer implementation services both on-site and remote, as well as training to reinforce the company's long-term IT success. Our ongoing remote administration support service offerings will enable your organization to focus on your normal day-to-day operations, saving you both precious time and money. Folks, I just want to let you know that we are at capacity right now, so if you had any of your coworkers that were planning to join us today, unfortunately they're not going to be able to. Maybe they can share a screen with you or something, but we are at capacity for this webinar. So for those of you that joined us, thank you. Feel free to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have or assist you with any project that you may have. I encourage you to visit our website at www.flycastpartners.com and check out future upcoming webinars that you or your coworkers or friends may have an interest in. Also, take a look at some of the various technologies that we offer, some of the services that we offer, some data sheets and white papers, anything that may be of interest to you. So I'm not going to delay this any further. We do have a packed house, Chuck, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you and let you get started with this most anticipated presentation.
Well, thank you, Rich. And yep, it's finally here. What we've all been waiting for has finally happened. ITIL IV has been released, and most of you, I'm sure, are joining us today because you've got a lot of questions about ITIL IV, and we're going to try to answer those. But probably one of the biggest ones you have is why? You know, why are we doing this? Why are we have a new version of ITIL? You know, if ITIL is based on best practices, why is it changing? Well, the answer is simply the fact that it is based on best practices, and the best practices of organizations that are successful in service management are changing, and they're evolving faster now than perhaps ever before. You know, the digital transformation that we hear so much about is forcing companies to change the way they do business, and that means IT has to change the way we do business as well. And of course, this is not the first time that ITIL has changed. You know, if you think back to what the IT industry looked like in 1980 when the British government kind of started this up by creating a project to develop a set of common guidelines for IT operations, it was basically a mainframe world. You know, PCs were just beginning to find a place in business and weren't in many homes yet at that point, if any at all. And networks were primarily point-to-point analog circuits. Anybody remember a 4800 baud modem? I certainly do. I worked on a lot of those in my time. But in 2000 then, when ITIL version 2 was released, the focus really was on maintaining the IT infrastructure. And of course, there were 7 books in ITIL at that point in time, and 2 of those were the ones that people primarily focused on, service support and service delivery. And while there were, again, other books in the library that dealt with application development and other topics, the focus was really on the infrastructure and on those 2 books, and again, really supporting that from a service support and service delivery standpoint. In 2007, when ITIL V3 was released and then revised, of course, in 2011, the focus shifted really to services then, and the service life cycle was introduced. And this was a significant change, but again, application development was still a bit of a stepchild, and it was, primarily a waterfall world we were all in at that point. There were other methodologies like Agile, which began in 2001, and DevOps that were starting to emerge, and they were starting to prove valuable to organizations. And while these were recognized to some extent in ITIL version 3, everyone was really struggling on how do we integrate these into ITIL and then what we're doing with service management. Now, in 2013, the British government created Exelos, which is a joint venture, and it's charged with taking over the ownership of ITIL along with, a lot of other best practice methodologies like Prince, Reslia, MOR, just a number of other qualification-based methodologies. And one of the first things they created in ITIL was the ITIL Practitioner course, which was in many ways the forerunner to ITIL 4. Now, ITIL Practitioner acknowledged and tried to better integrate with other methodologies and frameworks like Agile and DevOps and Lean, and adopt some of those same concepts and practices from these methodologies. And so much so that the need to completely revamp the underlying foundation of ITIL was recognized, and the work began in ITIL 4, which is what we're going to talk about today, about how that's matured and where we are with that in its maturity, because it is still actually maturing. So it's not a question really of why, but more of why did it take so long? Why did this, why are we just now getting to this when all this stuff has been going on and people have been finding ways to better accommodate it? So in today's discussion, we're going to address the following topics that you see here, and hopefully give you a solid understanding of ITIL 4 and how it matches up to ITIL V3 and the places where it's different from ITIL V3, and how it can really be used to ensure that your service management capabilities really deliver value to your stakeholders. And so let's start by discussing the ITIL guiding principles, since these are a key concept in ITIL 4, and in some ways they're really the backbone of a lot of the other topics we're going to mention here. Now, these guiding principles were really first introduced as part of ITIL Practitioner. They were in a little different form. I think there were 10 of them then, but they're really here, and they're not specific to ITIL or even to IT service management, but they're here because they can be applied to almost any initiative to ensure that you're taking a consistent approach with everything that you're doing, that every action or every decision that you make as an organization is really supported by one or more of these guiding principles. Now, the first principle is focus on value. And this ensures that every action that you take, again, every decision that you make, is aimed at creating value for your stakeholders. And that begins with really understanding who your stakeholders are and what value means to them. And notice I'm using the word stakeholders here because you have to create value for all of your stakeholders. It's not just the user or the consumers of the service, but other stakeholders like the organization itself, the business owners, or the shareholders of your public company. Everyone has to get value out of what you're doing in order to make this worthwhile and make it successful. The next guiding principle is start where you are. And this means considering what's already available and what you already have instead of just starting from scratch. Don't throw out everything that you ever learned in ITIL version 3 or version 2 if you go back that far to take on version 4. There are pieces of that you're still going to use. And if you're implementing ITIL, or if you're implementing processes, or if you're implementing a new service or process, whatever it is, the idea is just to make sure that you understand what you have and what you can leverage to go further. So you do that by analyzing your existing state and then identifying what is there today that's providing value and how can you leverage that to provide even more value. Now, Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act quality model has long been a part of the ITIL story. And this model really deals with the fact that you plan out what you're going to do, you actually do it, you check it to see if it's giving you the results you want, you act on what you find and make it a plan for the next step, and you do this in small repetitive steps to get you really where you really want to go and increase the level of maturity that you have as an organization. The Agile methodology is built around this with the concept of scrums and creating a minimum viable product and getting some feedback on that before you go to the next step and then going to the next step. So again, we're very much in alignment here with the Agile DevOps methodology now and trying to make sure that both ITIL and those are working closely together as we implement our products and our services. Collaborate, promote visibility focuses on removing silos and building trust. You can only do this when there is some transparency and information is shared across the organization and really with all the stakeholders, not just within the organization. You've got to make sure that everybody understands where you're going, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you're getting input from everybody that's there. Keep it simple. Oops, I think I got these out of order here in my slide, but let's talk about think and work holistically first then. But thinking and working holistically is all about working as an integrated organization where all of the activities and the role of that activity in meeting the vision and producing value are really considered. And you're always working towards that end state and making sure that anything you do is kind of the iterative steps that you're doing is leading you to that point and not creating work that you're going to have to redo later or throw away or anything like that. We want to make sure that we're constantly, with everything that we're doing, we're thinking of that end picture and where we want to go. Keep it simple. Well, this really means just simplifying your complex work by eliminating processes, procedures, services, actions, metrics, reports, anything that you're doing that doesn't truly add value and really help those stakeholders get their desired outcomes. Keep it to the basics. Don't make things too complex. And finally, optimize and automate looks at optimizing quality and consistency before automating the work. You want to make sure that you achieve the efficiency and the effectiveness that's really needed, and then automate the work so that you can minimize human intervention and with that the opportunity for human error. But you want to make sure that before you automate, you really have your processes, your services down to the basic level and they're doing what they need. And then you really want to automate the ones that are simple first, because it's those simple things that probably happen more often, but you have to take up a lot of time. And if you can automate those, you free up your resources to now work on other things that are more important and will actually help them create more value than perhaps a lot of these simple things. Now, these aren't really in any specific order here, and not every one of them is going to apply in every circumstance. But if you think about how the ITIL has been rolled out, it really, they're eating their own dog food here. They really followed this guidance. They focused on value and what the service management industry and its customers and stakeholders need to conduct business today. And then they started from where they are by leveraging elements of V3 and other frameworks and then building on those. And they're progressing iteratively. Many of us were a bit concerned that all of ITIL 4 wasn't in place before they began to roll out foundation training. But in a way, this is an example of an iterative and agile approach to refreshing ITIL. Let's get some pieces of it out there, let's see what works, and then we'll build on it and create the other courses and go from there. And of course, Axelos has really collaborated with the ITSM community as they were developing ITIL 4. I was lucky enough to be one of the people that reviewed some of the material that was being put together and provided some input into the content. So there was collaboration and transparency, and while a lot of us would have liked a little more transparency sometimes, it was there, and they were making some attempts to be transparent about what they were doing. And I could go on with these, but this is just an example of how these principles can be applied and how Axelos actually used those and applied those as they were developing ITIL 4. So one of the key concepts within ITIL 4 is the idea of the 4 dimensions of service management. Now, if you're familiar with ITIL version 3, you will recognize this as really an expansion of the 4 Ps that were in service design. And just in the same way that they were used in ITIL version 3, these 4 dimensions represent a very holistic approach to service management. As an organization, you have to ensure that there's a balance between each one of these dimensions, the organizations and people that you use, the information and technology that you use, the partners and suppliers that you're working with, and then the value streams and the processes themselves. And all four of these need to be used to deliver the products and services that you're really delivering. And then along with those is something that we refer to as PESTLE, which is really the political, the economic, the legal factors, the technology factors, all of the things that influence these four dimensions. Because as you implement and things go on and all of the things change, those factors are going to cause you to need to change the way that you use the four dimensions and the way these interact within your organization to really build these products and services. Now, if you ignore any of these, you really can lead to suboptimal products and services being created for, as an example, if you fail to consider organizations and people, and you can really lead to some reduced productivity, some organizational ineffectiveness, a loss of morale perhaps, and ultimately a loss of reputation as a service provider. If you fail to effectively use information and technology, that can contribute to a high risk of human errors and a loss of productivity and reduced availability, reliability, and that sort of thing. If you're not aligning well with your partners and making sure that those partners are well aligned with the needs of the organization and managed well, you can have an increase in cost and a loss of productivity, as well as introduce availability, reliability, and security issues again. So, you need to make sure that all of this is working together and you're really looking at all four of these dimensions as you implement ITIL 4 or implement really any methodology that you're putting out there. Now, ITIL 4 is based around the concept of a service value system. This is one of the really new pieces of this. And this system provides a powerful and flexible operating model for the management and the governance of products and services that can create value for your customers and your stakeholders and the organization itself. The service value system, as you're seeing here, is comprised of 5 components. And at the core of the service value system is the service value chain. And the service value chain, which we're going to explore a little more closely in the next slide, is really a set of interconnected activities that the organization performs to deliver a product or a service that's valuable to its customers, and do that by turning opportunity and demand into value. Now, ITIL 4 defines opportunity as the options or the possibilities that add value for the stakeholders. What are the products? What are the services that we as an organization can provide to them to help them achieve the outcomes they need? And then demand is defined as the need or the desire on behalf of the customer or the stakeholder for those products and services. Value is really the perceived benefit, the usefulness and the importance of something, a product or a service, to those customers and those stakeholders. How well does it really help them achieve the outcomes that they want? That's how they're going to determine value. And then surrounding the service value chain are 4 essential components. First, the guiding principles, which we've talked about already. Again, these are guidelines that you would use to make sure that regardless of your goals, your strategies, the type of work that's being performed, or the management structure that you have, that you're really making the right decisions to move the organization in the way that it needs to move forward. Governance, a very critical part of anything you're doing. This is how the organization is going to be directed and controlled. And we've got a little more in another slide here where we'll talk about the importance of governance and what governance is really about. The practices themselves are really sets of those organizational resources that are designed for performing work or accomplishing objectives. And the processes are built, again, around those 4 dimensions we talked about earlier: people and organization, information technology, partners and suppliers, value streams, and processes. And while ITIL version 3 was based on best practices, it really focused more on the processes. And ITIL 4 encourages us to take a more holistic approach and organizes all of this into practices. And we'll look at those practices and how those are going to be used in another slide here again. Continual improvement, you're going to see that continual improvement is also called out as a practice, but it's so important and such a integral part of the service value system and the service value chain that it's called out here specifically in the model. And it needs to be a recurring organizational activity that's performed at all levels in the organization to ensure that your performances continually meet your stakeholders' expectations. So again, you're going to see continually improvement talked about a lot within ITIL 4, and it really is a lot of what's being done within ITIL 4 is to really help you as an organization improve. Now, at the core of the service value chain, or the service value system, is this service value chain. And this is really the central element which outlines the key activities or steps that are required to respond to demand and create value in the form of products and services. So let's take a closer look at this and blow it up a little bit so we can see this a little better. But the 6 value chain activities starting at the top here are planned, and this is where the purpose is to make sure that everyone in the organization has a clear understanding of the vision, our current status, the direction we're going to improve things for each of the 4 dimensions, all the products and services across the organization, but making sure that that's well understood by everyone. The engage activity is where we're going to make sure that we've got a good understanding of our stakeholder needs and that we're really transparent, there's good communication, we're continually engaging with those stakeholders, and we've got a good relationship with those stakeholders. And remember, when we talk about stakeholders, we're not just talking about the consumer or the user, we're talking about our internal stakeholders, our support groups, our management, our external stakeholders. We want to engage with all of the stakeholders with what we're doing. Design and transition is where we're going to ensure that the products and the services continually meet those stakeholders' expectations for quality and cost and time to market and all of those other things that are important to them to really get the value they need. Obtain and build is where we're going to ensure that the components, click the button too far there, just a moment. There we go. Obtain and build ensures that the service components really are available when and where they're needed and that we continue to meet those agreed specifications. Deliver and support, this is where we ensure that the services are delivered and they're supported, again, to meet those agreed specifications and meet our stakeholders' expectations. And then, as I said before, you're going to see improve again here because this makes sure that we're ensuring continual improvement of the products and the services and the practices across all the value chain activities and the 4 dimensions of service management. Now, these activities represent the steps, again, that the organization is going to take in the creation of value. And each activity that's shown here really contributes to the value chain by transforming specific inputs into outputs. And the output could be demand, or the input could be a demand from the outside value chain, or they could be outputs of other activities within the service value chain. And in this way, these activities are connected and they interact with one another, with each activity really receiving and providing triggers for future actions that need to be taken. Now, not every activity is going to be used to determine a specific demand into value, and they're also not in any prescribed order. As you see here, again, the activities within the service chain can be repeated. You can move back and forth within these. We'll take whatever path we need to take through this service value chain to make sure that we're delivering the value that's needed to fulfill the demand. So in this way, this service value chain activities allows the organization to manage and fulfill demands for all types of services, from strategic demands that allow the organization to thrive and grow in a competitive environment to operational requests for information, services, support, any of those things. Now, for those of you familiar with ITIL V3, the service value system and the service value chain replaces the service life cycle, and it offers a more agile approach. But while it replaces it, it's really built into this service value chain. If you look at it, I mean, plan was our first stage of the service life cycle, where we're really looking at our strategy and what do we need to do and who are our stakeholders and what do we need to provide to them, all of that sort of thing. Design and transition, you'll see, is here. That was another stage in the service life cycle. There was a design and a transition stage. They were separate. Deliver and support's here, which is basically our operational practices. So as you can see, this really is not saying that there was anything wrong with the service life cycle. It's just a different way of looking at it. And quite honestly, the service life cycle, a lot of people, when they looked at that, believed that it was a linear approach. Whenever you say life cycle, it gives you the idea that there's a start and an end to it. So people were under the false impression that you had to start with strategy, then you went to design, then you went to transition, then you went to operations, then you went to continual improvement. And it was really never intended that way, but a lot of organizations believe that, and a lot of organizations actually organize around that, quite frankly. Work with some organizations where they built their organization around those life cycle stages. And what happened was that really kind of encouraged siloed working and took them in a direction that we really don't want to go. So this service value system and the service value chain here is really designed to discourage siloed working and enable flexibility and let us work more as an organization more holistically. There's not a rigid structure here. Again, you can combine these into multiple value streams to really address the needs of the organization in a variety of different scenarios. Now, for those of you familiar with Lean, Agile, and DevOps, value stream is something you're probably familiar with. But in version 3 of ITIL, value stream was not recognized at all. You can go back and look at the books I have, and you can do a search on value stream, and you won't find it anywhere in ITIL V3. But it's a significant concept here within ITIL 4. And ITIL 4 defines a value stream as the series of steps that the organization is going to take to create and deliver their products and services to their consumers. And it's, again, a combination of the organization's value chain activities that make up this value stream, and they can be organized in a number of different ways. So let me give you kind of an example of this. Let's say that, I've got an application that the user has been using in the past. For some reason today they can't get to it. That's the demand. They've got a demand here that they've got to be able to get to this application. We're going to engage with them typically through the service desk, where the user is going to contact the service desk. We're going to log an incident. It may be that the user goes to a portal to do that. There's a lot of different ways it could be done. But we're going to engage with that customer, and we want to make sure we understand their requirements. What are they trying to do? What is it they're seeing? What's happening? What's the urgency behind it? What's the impact behind that needs to be associated with it? Then we're going to deliver some initial support. And in the beginning, this might be our service desk that's doing this, where they're going to perform some initial triage. And they might identify, for example, here that there's a network issue that's out there that they believe could really be causing this particular problem. And this is where we might go backwards and repeat an activity here, because now that service desk is going to want to engage with a support team. And they're going to escalate that issue to a support team. But in that engagement, again, they're making sure that that support team, we fulfill their requirements in terms of the information we pass on to them and what we tell them about what the customers experience and all of that sort of thing. Now that support team is delivering and supporting. So the network engineer in this example might identify that there's a failed component here. So where that network engineer needs to get a replacement for a component. Now this is where, we may have to reach out to an external supplier here at this point to really...
Chuck, your audio is fading in and out.
Is that any better there?
Yep, you seem fine right there.
Okay.
But might want to go back about 2 sentences.
All right. Well, I was talking about the obtain and build here, where it may be that at this point, the network engineer has to reach out to one of our suppliers. And when they do that, we're really entering into their value chain. There's a demand here. We now have a demand for this part. We're going to engage with them, and they're going to engage with us to understand what that part is. They're going to deliver and support and get that part to us, and then we're going to continue on with our work. So you can hopefully see here how these value streams and value chains work not just internally to your organization, but outside your organization as well, and in other service organizations that you're dealing with. Once we've replaced the part, now we're going to engage with that customer again to make sure that we really confirm that they're in business, they can do what they need to do, and they're getting the value that they really needed to get from this particular service, and they're able to do their business. So this is an example of the value stream, and also how these service value chain and these service value activities kind of work to deliver all of this. Now, I mentioned governance and how that's a critical activity really to make sure that your organization is following the business and service management strategy that's been put in place, and that you have compliance to policies and practices that allow the organization to be successful. And it really begins with evaluation, where the governing body for the organization is going to determine and look at things and determine their strategy, its portfolio, the relationships it need to have with other parties, third-party suppliers, that sort of thing. And they're going to have to continually do this because those needs are going to change over time, and the organization is going to change. But once they've done that evaluation, now they're going to direct, and this is where the governing body is going to assign some responsibility for and direct the preparation and the implementation of the strategy and the policies that have to be put in place to support that. And the strategies really set the direction and the prioritization for organizational activity, future investment, all of that. Policies really establish the requirements for behavior across the organization, and where relevant, suppliers and partners and other stakeholders, how we're all going to behave in executing these practices. Governance then monitors all this to make sure that we're moving in the direction we need to move as an organization. And then as they're doing that, continually go back and reevaluate that, make whatever changes they need to make or determine what changes they need to make, offer direction to get the organization moving in that way, monitor those changes. So you can almost see where this, again, is an iterative approach here for governance. It matches up very well to Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act when you think about these cycles. But very important that you have proper governance within your IT service management practice. Well, let's talk for a moment about continual improvement because, as I've said, this is a big part of ITIL 4. And again, for those of you that are familiar with ITIL version 3, you'll notice that the word service is missing from the title here. ITIL 4 really better recognizes that improvement activities aren't just directed towards the services, but at every aspect of service management within the organization. We're really trying to make improvements to all of those dimensions that we talked about earlier: people and organization, information technology, partner suppliers, value streams, and processes. We want to look at improving all of those areas. Now, you may have seen as well that when we talked about the service value system, the service value chain, again, we've mentioned continual improvement every time we've talked about this. And that's really, again, just to stress the importance of this as part of ITIL 4. Now, you might also notice that there's a step that's been added between how do we get there and did we get there. That wasn't in ITIL version 3, and that's take action. This is where we're going to really execute those improvement actions. I guess in ITIL version 3, it was just assumed that everyone knew you had to do something, but it never really was called out there. In ITIL 4, we're really calling it out a lot more that you have to take action, and even beyond that, there are practices within ITIL 4 that really speak to how to take action. And when you look at those, the first one, of course, is organizational change management. And while this was mentioned as an important accompanying framework in ITIL version 3, it's now a formal practice within ITIL 4. And as many of us in the industry have recognized for a long time, any effort to implement improvements in the way people work, the tools they use, the processes they follow, anytime you're trying to change their behaviors, you need organizational change management. And you need some very effective techniques for performing that and making sure that you're moving the organization in the desired direction you want it to move. Measurement and reporting is a practice now within ITIL. Again, very important for continual improvement. You have to have benchmarks that you've established. You have to have critical success factors defined, key performance indicators, so that you can measure your performance, know how you're doing against that. As you make improvements, look to see whether those improvements are moving you in the right direction, or sometimes you can make an improvement that actually sets you back a step or two. So you want to know that, and the only way to really know that is through measurement and reporting. Risk management is another practice that's going to be called out in ITIL 4. It was mentioned a lot in ITIL 3, but there really wasn't, too much around it. It really referred you off to management of risk, which is another methodology, but it's going to be discussed a lot more now. And when we're talking about continual improvement, we want to make sure that as we're making improvements, we're adding new tools, we're adding new processes, we're changing the way people work, that we're not introducing any new risk. And if we are, that we're having effective ways to mitigate that risk if it really happens. And then as well, you also want to look as part of continual improvement of what's the risk if we don't do anything. If we don't do this improvement, what's the risk of that to the organization? And then, of course, as I said, continual improvement is itself going to be a practice within ITIL 4. Now, in the very first slide, we talked about guiding principles and how this will apply to anything that you do in service management. And this is kind of an example of those guiding principles as applied to continual improvement. When you look at what is the vision, well, we're trying to focus on value. What do our stakeholders perceive within that vision that provides value to them? Who are our stakeholders? But again, what within that do they see that promotes or that provides value to them? And then we want to collaborate and promote visibility. Everyone should be aware of what this vision is, what our goals and objectives are. And then as we're working, we want to make sure that we're constantly thinking and working holistically, that we're constantly working towards that end state and towards the vision. Where are we now? That speaks directly to start where you are. Understand what you have today, where you are with your processes, your tools, with your training for your people, And then, again, collaborate and promote visibility here. Don't be afraid to say, we don't do very good in this area. Our incident management process is not any good, or this is bad, or the tool we have doesn't work right. Be visible about it. Make sure that people know and get their input on what can be done to make it better. Where do we want to be? Again, speaks very much to progress iteratively with feedback. Once you know where you want to be, now we've got to take some small steps to get us there. And we want to continue to think and work holistically as we're doing that, so that we're, again, constantly looking at that big picture, even as we're taking those small steps, and making sure that each step we take is a step in the right direction. We want to keep it simple and practical, in that we want to make sure that we can do these things, that they're simple, everybody understands them, we can get those things done. We take on something too complex, we want to break it down into smaller steps to make it easier for us to accomplish. And then, of course, optimize and automate. Make sure that we're getting opportunities wherever we can to get us to where we want to be through optimization and automation. How do we get there speaks to, again, we're going to get there by progressing iteratively. We want to make sure that as we're doing that, we collaborate, promote visibility, that we're constantly thinking about that end state and keeping it simple with all the things we're putting in place as our projects to help us get there. Take action speaks really to focus on value. Making sure, again, that everything that we're doing is really going to deliver value to a customer, that we understand what that value is, and we understand the stakeholder. I slipped myself and said customer. We understand the stakeholder that's going to get that value. And then, did we get there? We want to make sure that we're really focusing on evaluating whether or not we got there by looking at value and whether or not the value is really there. There's a concept that's going to be, I don't know, really comes from ITIL 4, but it's talked about in ITIL 4, and it's called the watermelon effect. And what this really speaks to is that, you can have a lot of metrics that every time you look at your charts, they're all green. Everything looks great. But if you're measuring the wrong things, what's underneath of that skin might be red, and it might even be rotten. So you want to make sure that, you're measuring the right things to really tell you whether or not you got there, and you're doing that by measuring how much value this is providing to your stakeholders in your business. Then how do we keep the momentum going? Again, focus on value here, and this is an opportunity to think about those stakeholders that have helped you get where you are today. Make sure you're rewarding your people that are doing the improvements and helping with improvements, and the people that are giving those people time to make the improvements, all of that, because that's going to help you keep the momentum going if they're seeing the value that they need to get out of this, as well as those end customers and consumers seeing that. And again, of course, collaborate, promote visibility, and then think and work holistically so that we're constantly working towards that bigger picture. Now, I've mentioned practices a number of times here. Practices are really the sets of organizational resources that you're going to use to accomplish an objective. And remember that they're made up of those four dimensions. They're made up of organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, the value streams, and the processes themselves. Now, there are 34 practices that are called out in ITIL 4, which is a bit more than what we had in just processes in version 3, so you're going to see a few changes here. There are 14 general management practices. These are really adopted and adapted from service management, from general business management domains, looking at what best practices are in those areas. There are 17 management practices. These were developed primarily within the service management and IT service management industries. And then there are 3 technical management practices which were really adapted from technology management domains and modified a little bit to make them match service management purposes by really expanding and shifting the focus from technology to services. This is the 34 practices that are out there. As you can see, they're organized as the way I just mentioned a moment ago. You'll see some new ones in here. And you'll see some changes in here. Practices like organizational change management, which I talked about earlier, measurement and reporting, and risk management, those are now called out as separate practices, along with some other new ones like workforce and talent management that you see in here. You'll also note that some have new names. For example, request fulfillment is now called service request management. Or, excuse me, we're now calling it request fulfillment. I got it backwards. We were calling it request fulfillment. It was called service request management before. We've shortened it up a little bit. And then change management is now change control. Quite honestly, we struggled for a long time to get people to stop calling it change control and start calling it change management. Now we're going back to calling it change control. And this was likely done to really help us differentiate it from organizational change management, because that's a common misunderstanding when we start talking about those two practices or processes. You'll see that asset management is now a separate practice from service configuration management, and release and deployment are also separated into two separate practices. So this is the entire list that's there. The ones that are in red here are covered in the ITIL Foundations course. They're not covered quite as much as we did in ITIL version 3, but they are discussed there. The ones in lighter blue are discussed in ITIL 4, but they're not significantly talked about, and they're really not part of the exam, other than the fact that they exist. So with that, let's take a look at the certification scheme for ITIL 4. As I mentioned before, the foundation is so new and so different from what we've talked about before that regardless of where you are in your certifications, it's going to start with ITIL Foundation, and everyone has to go through ITIL Foundation. Doesn't matter where you are in ITIL version 3, if you're an expert, if you've done some of the intermediates, everything starts over again with ITIL 4, because you have to have this understanding of the new concepts and the new foundation, really, that's underneath of all this to really advance and go any further. Once you've done ITIL Foundation, there are going to be, as you can see here, there are going to be 5 other books that are actually created. Create, Deliver, and Support, Drive Stakeholder Value, High Velocity IT, Direct, Plan, and Improve, and Digital IT Strategy. Each one of those I expect is going to be a book within the library, and there'll be a course specifically built around that. And as a professional, you can either work towards the ITIL Managing Professional certification or the ITIL Strategic Leader certification, depending on where you are in your career and what's important for you to really achieve. Now, if you're already a ITIL expert with 17 credit, or you're someone with 17 credits or more, you're working towards that ITIL expert, you were perhaps getting ready to take the MLC, that sort of thing, there is going to be a bridge course at this level that's going to be introduced in the second quarter of 2019 that will allow you to move directly from where you are, if you're an ITIL expert or you're someone with 17 credits, to achieve the Managing Professional certification. That should be out, like I say, second quarter of 2019. I expect it's going to be towards the end of that, but it is coming out. If you're not quite there yet, but you started to get some certifications, there are a number of companies that are offering a fast track where you can take some online courses to get you up to those 17 credits, get you what you need so that you're in position to really take advantage of this Managing Professional Transition course when it's actually created and rolled out to everyone. And then if you completed all of the 5 modules and you're interested in becoming an ITIL Master, that's going to be available to you as well. You'll have to do more than just complete the modules, of course. Typically, you're going to have to apply for that. You'll have to prove that you've contributed to the industry, that you've written white papers, you've trained people, you've implemented a number of ITIL implementations. That sort of thing will actually allow you to get to ITIL Master if that's something that you were looking to do. I skipped a slide here because we were trying to get through this in the time frame for you, but I just want to kind of quickly go back to it. ITIL 4, as I said before, is really trying to take advantage of and link into and integrate into all of these other frameworks. Certainly Agile and DevOps are key ones here that we want to link into. They can really provide some benefit in the way that you actually implement ITIL, for example, or the way that you implement an ITIL tool. Agile focuses on engagement and transition of new requirements, and so that can be very useful if you're improving your services, improving your own processes, improving your own tools, that sort of thing. Lean is a tested and proven method for improving products and services, along with the processes for how those are produced and produced, making sure that you're, again, focusing on value, not doing a lot in there that you really don't need to do. Kanban is a visual approach to managing tasks, and while you normally associate this with agile software development, it can easily be adapted for a much wider use. For example, tracking all of the tasks that are involved with a major change or a root cause analysis activity and problem management. Those are some examples of how you might use that. So the technique can be a very useful tool in other areas. DevOps, as I mentioned earlier, to me this is agile on steroids, really. It really places a strong focus on engaging with the business to make sure that you're meeting their demand and you're implementing changes more rapidly, but without sacrificing quality. Doesn't mean that change management goes away. It just means that you may do it a little differently, or change control. Excuse me, I resorted back to the old term here. But DevOps really emphasizes that collaborative approach, and it can be very beneficial and well in making sure that we continually meet those. Prince 2, or as we more commonly call it here in the United States, or refer to it, PMBOK, that's kind of our version of that, is a structured project and management discipline that can be used in conjunction with all these other methodologies to make sure that as you're implementing these, you're doing it in a way that has some service gates, and make sure that you have quality gates, and you're doing everything you need to do in the right manner. Kepner and 4A is a methodology for solving incidents and problems quickly, accurately, and permanently using a first-time, every-time approach, so that it's very effective, leads to some very effective root cause analysis techniques to make sure that you really get to the root cause of that incident or problem, it's resolved, and your efforts aren't wasted in any way. Cloud computing, this really is one of the big business drivers for ITIL 4, frankly. Organizations are looking to cloud computing to reduce their costs, to get higher speed, greater flexibility, greater ability to scale, increase productivity, a lot of real good reasons for looking at cloud computing. And again, ITIL 4 then places a heavy importance on managing those third-party suppliers. And again, they're part of our 4 dimensions, so that we make sure that we're using them in the right way to get the capacity, the availability, security, reliability that we need. And then COBIT 5 is a comprehensive framework for the governance and management of IT. And when you combine that with ITIL, it really makes sure that you're not just taking a holistic approach, but that you're also governing, managing, and measuring your services in a way that's going to make sure that you meet your requirements and you really get that expected benefits. So a lot in 45 minutes to tell you where we are with ITIL 4 and kind of what's going on. I thank you for your time this afternoon. If there's any way that we can help you in understanding more about ITIL 4 through some additional training, or help you in implementing ITIL 4, well, we'd certainly be more than happy to help you with that. And Rich, I'll turn it back over to you with that.
Folks, I want to thank you once again for joining us for the ITIL 4 webinar. We did have a packed house today, which meant that we had quite a few folks that were unable to attend because they couldn't simply get in. It's a good problem to have. There's a lot of you that have made special requests to me. I've tried to answer all of you. If I didn't answer you yet, please email me at rich.longo@flycastpartners.com. That's rich.longo@flycastpartners.com, and I'll try to get an answer to you within the next hour or so. Those of you that are requesting copies of this presentation, also email me at rich.longo@flycastpartners.com. We'll make sure you get a link to the presentation as soon as it's been completed. You can also call us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278, or chat with us on our website. We have IT specialists that are chatting Monday through Friday during normal business hours. Until our next webinar, next Thursday, folks, we have another great one coming your way. So tune in then. Thank you for joining us today. Don't work too hard. And, till next week.